In this presentation, we'll take a look at the general guidelines to aid beginners to commence resistance training in a safe and effective manner. Part of this process includes us going through the basic of a resistance training program and key variables commonly used to assess workload and volume. This lecture will also discuss the basic program structure that is suitable for beginners. We will revisit the ACSM guidelines for muscle strengthening activities, as it provides a good starting point for beginners and those who have ceased training for an extended period of time. A resistance training program generally requires the designer to make decision on a number of variables to define the exercise stimuli. Essentially, the choice is made for the specific combination of acute program variables create an exercise stimulus, and this choice therefore have to be specific to the needs and goals of the individuals. Firstly, repetition. The word repetitions refers to the number of times an exercise is performed in a single bout. So you might choose to do only a handful of repetitions but using quite a high resistance, or you might decide to do a high number of repetitions but using low to moderate resistance. The next is the word set. Set refers to a group of repetitions. For a particular exercise, once you've decided you are going to do a number of repetitions which corresponds to the intensity by which you will perform the exercise, you might decide to do multiple sets of that exercise to increase training stimulus. Volume is simply a product of sets and repetitions. Sets times reps will give you the total number of repetitions or the volume for that particular exercise. Another important variable that you need to be aware of is intensity. Intensity essentially refers to amount of resistance used in resistance training, so amount of weight that you may lift for a particular exercise. It generally is expressed as percentage of one repetition maximum, with 1 RM or one repetition maximum refers to amount of weight that you can lift or perform only for one repetition of the exercise. So let's assume that your 1 RM for a bench press is 100 kilograms. As part of your training routine, you might choose to do 5 repetitions of the bench press at 80% of 1 RM. So in this case, you'll do 5 repetitions of an exercise per set, lifting 80 kilograms. Another way to express repetition maximum is through the number of repetition itself. So you might do an exercise at 5 repetition maximum. What that means is you need to find a weight that you can engage in, but you can only complete 5 repetitions of the exercise and no more. It is important to note that intensity and volume have an inverse relationship. So as intensity increases, volume of exercise, particular repetition per set, will need to come down. Vice versa, if you want to complete high volume of work, so i.e. as high number of repetitions and maybe high number of sets as well, then intensity needs to be accommodated appropriately. The total exercise load is therefore a product of volume and intensity, so it's number of set times the number of repetition and times exercise intensity, which is the amount of weight used. For example, you might choose to do a particular exercise for 10 reps at 80 kilograms for 3 sets. The total load for this exercise will be 240. By keeping records of intensity, volume, and load allows you or individual to track their progress and improvement over a period of time. Now that you know of important resistance training variables, let's have a look at appropriate structure or training programs for people who are engaging resistance training for the first times, or for people who have a long period of a time away from the weights room. You may recall the physical activities guideline provided by the American College of Sport Medicine for strengthening activities. Their recommendation provides a suitable starting point for people when they are starting out. The intensity of around 70% performed to volition or fatigue is sufficient to elicit adaptation without being overstrenuous. This is particularly important if they are still refining exercise techniques. It is recommended that 8 to 10 exercises be performed and these exercises should cover major muscle groups. For beginners, we emphasize a generalized full body program. And regardless whether the exercise call for the use of body weight, free weights, or machine weights, or whether the exercise is of a single joint or isolated activities, or is a multi-joint compounded movement, it's not something that beginners should be too concerned with. A variety of exercise, integrate all of these will allow beginners to adapt and develop appropriately. While the concept of functional training is gaining awareness and popularity in today's training environment, it is important to progress appropriately. General exercise should be mastered before progressing towards a more challenging movement pattern. For example, a beginner should master the basics half squat before starting performing a single-legged squat or squat jump, where poor techniques and strength can lead to unnecessary injuries. So the key adage here is technique before overload. Perform exercise in a stable environment before reducing stability, including performing exercise on a single leg or single limb support or an unstable surface like a wobble board or a BOSU. So when it comes to programming and exercise selection, one way to ensure that you develop a full body programs that provide balance and optimal development across all of the major muscle groups is one way to do so is to identify key muscle groups and then label an exercise against it. So here's an example of what an initial program may look like. For the chest, you may select an exercise like the bench press. For the upper back, lat pull down will do the job pretty well. Alternatively, you might choose to do things like a seated row or a bench pull. For the shoulders, we are going with lateral races, but there are also others that you may choose to do if you prefer it. Overhead press or push press also work really well. The arm flexors, so you've got a variety of flexors exercise, but we're going to go with the standard bicep curls at this point. For the arm extensors, so these are your triceps, and we have chosen the tricep extension as an exercise for our initial program. To the abdominals, we are going with our stock standard abdominal curls, but again, there are myriads of abdominal activities or exercise that really challenge your abdominal strength that you can use. For back, so this is middle and lower back, we're going with back extension on a Roman chair. For the lower limbs, and we're going to have a couple of lower limb activities here, partly because there are multiple segments to your lower limbs. First one is a leg press, which is a compound exercise requiring hip extension and knee extension. This exercise will engage both the quadriceps as well as the glutes and the hamstrings. And for the second lower limb exercise, we are going to go with calf raises to target the lower portion of the lower limb. So overall, this is the initial program for our beginners. Do note that if you're exercising a couple of sessions a week, and as recommended by ACSM, individuals should engage in resistant training exercise at least twice a week on non-consecutive days. You don't have to repeat the same exercise on the second session. So you might change things slightly. We're changing bench press to cable flies, lat pull down to seated row as an example. Okay, so the two programs for the 2 different days doesn't have to be exactly the same. In fact, variety can actually be quite beneficial to the development of the individuals. Things to consider as you engage in the exercise are how you are sequencing exercise activities. And it is advisable that you engage in multi-joint or compound movement before single joint activities. This is helpful because it helps preventing the performance of the large muscles multi-joint exercise being affected by the fatigue of the smaller muscles. Using the bench press as an example, the anterior deltoid, pectoralis major and the triceps all contribute to the lift. If you did the tricep extension beforehand and they are fatigued, the ability to perform the bench press could be adversely affected. It is also advisable that as you go through the program, you should try to arrange exercise so that successive exercise only minimally affect the muscle groups of the previous exercise. So in summary, the ACSM guidelines for resistant training is actually quite ideal starting point for beginners who wish to commence resistant training. It is important though, when you choose exercise or when you're programming the activities, you aim for general development of all major muscle groups rather than trying to be overly complex and technical. Programs can include the use of free weights, machine weights, and various body weight exercise. And at this stage, it's advisable that you use whatever equipments that are available that allow you to engage in the exercise effectively. Focus initially on technique and posture before increasing intensity, and that's just to ensure that the individual can exercise safely and progress at an optimal rate. And this concludes this video presentation. Thank you for watching.